I've just been looking at this model sailing ship. It's a galleon. I wonder what it was like being a sailor on a galleon. What did they eat? How did they live? And what was it like inside? Well, we can't see inside a galleon, not these days. But here's a book that gives you some idea of what it was like. It's called See Inside a Galleon. So, let's see inside. The book's full of pictures and information about old sailing ships. It shows how they started off as very simple little ships and how they changed and grew bigger over the years. Galleons weren't very large ships. They were about 45 meters long and 12 meters wide. So perhaps you could measure out that distance somewhere outside and you'll see just how big they were. But galleons were also very beautiful ships. Here's a galleon on its way home after a voyage. It's a Dutch one, as you can tell from the flag. It must have been a fine sight for the people on shore to see. And it must have been a fine sight for the sailors to see their homes again, because life was tough and the work was hard on the old ships. In those days, about 300 years ago, sailors dressed like this. They didn't have a uniform. And there was a lot of yo-heave-ho on the old ships. Here they're hauling up the anchor before they set sail. They're using a capstan. It was all sail in those days, so the sailors must have been kept busy, furling and unfurling sails as the wind rose and fell. Yes, life was tough for the ordinary sailor, but it was better for the officers and the captain. The captain lived here. It's called the after castle. He had room to move around and a proper bed to sleep in. On some ships, there were animals and fowls for the officers and the captain to eat. But for the ordinary sailors, it was salt beef or pork and hard biscuits. And usually the food was cold because it was too dangerous to light fires at sea. Of course, most of the galleons in those days were fighting ships, so when they went into battle, life for the sailor became much more difficult and dangerous. And down below where the cannons were, it must have been hot and smoky and noisy. Cannon ready? Aim! Fire! So, those are some of the things you'd find if you could see inside a galleon. There are some other books in this series. Here's one that lets you see inside a castle. And this one lets you see inside a television studio. And one that lets you see inside an airport. So, a different kind of book this week. Not one that tells a story, but a book that tells about real-life things and how they work. Perhaps they're in your library. So I'll leave you to find them for yourself and see inside. Goodbye. Today's book was See Inside a Galleon from the See Inside series, published by Hutchinson. Hello. Here's a book called Hubert Hunts His Hum. And there he is, hard at it, hunting for his hum. So what is a hum? And why does Hubert need a telescope to find it? That's what we're going to find out. Hubert lived in a big city, but you can't see him here. You can see him better through this telescope. Oh, thanks. And there he is, up at the window in his little flat, where he lived very comfortably with his cat and a big red flower in a pot on the windowsill. Well, Hubert was a very happy sort of man. He was always ready with a laugh or a smile or a chuckle or a giggle. There was always something that made him smile, or something that made him laugh, or something that made him hop up and down like a little boy. Whee! Or jump for joy. Hooray for me! He makes you want to laugh too, doesn't he? Anyway, every morning when he woke up, he didn't start the day with a frown, or a grump, or a sniff, or a complaint. No. He started the day with a hum. And the cat started the day with a yawn. So that's where the hum comes from. It was one of those hums, the kind you do with your lips together. Hubert hummed when he jumped out of bed. He hummed in the shower, but sometimes he hummed with his mouth open because the soap got up his nose. And he hummed to the mirror as he dressed for work, and the mirror hummed right back at him. He hummed while he had his breakfast, and he hummed while he polished his shoes. Oh, he was a great hummer, was Hubert. On the way to work in the morning, Hubert hummed on the train. And when he got to the office, he hummed in the lift. So far, so good. Hubert, the happy hummer. He was famous for his humming. In fact, if he hadn't been a man, he might have been a hummingbird. But the book is called Hubert Hunts His Hum. And if you have to hunt for something, it means you can't find it. One morning, Hubert woke up and tried to hum. What do you think happened? Exactly. And it didn't happen all of a sudden. Hubert had lost his hum. Hubert would have to hunt for his hum. No hum, no happiness. So he started to look for it, behind the pillow. No, not there. Was it down the plug hole in the bath? Hello? Are you down there, hum? No, no hum there. Was it around the yellow pot with a big red flower? No. And it wasn't under the cat or up on the ceiling. How would you like to wake up one morning and discover that your hum had vanished? It's a pretty serious thing, and it was very serious for Hubert. He looked for it in all sorts of places, places that I'd never think of to look for a missing hum. But it wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere. Hubert was humless. And he knew that he couldn't be happy without a hum. But the book doesn't finish there. There's a lot more of it which you can read for yourself. And there's an interesting thing about this book. It has a big brother. It's exactly the same as the little book, only much bigger all round. So if you're the sort of person that likes to have stories read to you, then this might be just right for you. But if you prefer to read stories for yourself, then the little one might be right for you. And perhaps it's in your library. I'll leave you to find out why. Hello. Here's a book about an apple. Now, just about everyone likes apples, but this apple is a little different. To start with, it's just so big, but it's magic as well. Right. Let's have a look at the magic apple. It all began long, long ago in a faraway country in the garden of a certain Mrs. Potter. Now, each year, when Mrs. Potter picked the apples from the tree in her garden, she left the biggest and the best on the tree just as a way of saying thank you. But one year, the biggest apple was bigger than ever before. Well, you know and I know that even the biggest apples fall off the tree in time. But this one didn't. It just grew and grew and grew. Winter came and the apple was still there. Crowds of people came to admire it, and tradesmen even set up stalls.
Get your lucky apple seeds here. Lucky apple juice, try a glass. All day long there was shouting and noise, and poor Mrs. Potter didn't know what to think. Even the mayor was there, but in his eyes there was a wicked gleam. He called a meeting of the town council and told them that the roots of Mrs. Potter's apple tree were on town land. Therefore, the great apple must also belong to the town. The council agreed. They always did. And Mrs. Potter was shown the proclamation. Poor Mrs. Potter. It was all very distressing. But what was the wicked old mayor up to? That night, he crept out of town and up to old Mother Rankin's house on the hill. The house was very spooky and full of parrots and potions and things. And Mother Rankin knew about magic. But she saw that the mayor was a nasty, greedy man. "Yes, it is a magic apple," she said. "But if you want to know what it can do, you must find out." And she cackled something terrible. Well, you know how people who use magic can be a bit strange. And all the parrots joined in. "Find out, find out, find out," they squawked. And the mayor ran for his life out of the house. But the mayor wasn't beaten yet. Perhaps Mrs. Potter's tree has produced magic apples before, he thought. There might be a record in the town archives. So he put Councillor Rambo down amongst the dust and mice and told him to find out all he could about the magic apple. Councillor Rambo found out all right, but he kept part of the story to himself. "I'll teach that mayor a lesson," he said. Well, the mayor was delighted with what Rambo had found. "My good people," he announced, "I have found out that this is indeed a magic apple. And whoever takes the first bite, his wish will come true. For the good of the town, I, as mayor, will take the first bite." So he did, and the crowd gasped. The apple had collapsed. Was that the end of the magic apple? What had the mayor wished for? And what was Councillor Rambo up to? And what happened to poor old Mrs. Potter? If you read the book, you'll find out. Goodbye.
I think that taxi was haunted.
Don't be silly, Lance.
Well, didn't you hear that eerie ticking sound? It was there the whole trip.
That was the taxi meter.
Well, what about the blood-curdling moaning noise?
That was the driver singing.
And all that screeching and screaming?
He was just a bad driver. Now, what do you think of the house?
Looks a bit spooky. You sure there aren't any ghosts?
Lance, I've been here all day moving the furniture in. The only ghost in there is the ghosting on the television set.
It looks haunted to me. It sure feels haunted to me.
We have to get the key from the neighbour.
Oh, I bet there's ghosts in here.
Once and for all, there are no ghosts. Sorry to disturb you. You're obviously in the middle of making the bed. I was wondering if we could have our key. key. The key! The key!
Ow! Oh. All right. Here's your key.
Thank you.
You won't last long.